Alright folks, I saw the Batman a second time, and I think that, and also the fact that I left some stuff out of the first video that I wanted to touch on, means that I should probably make a second video. So that's what you're watching right now. Let's get into it. Before we get started, I just want to say this is a part 2 to my original Batman review. It should be up there. You can find it if you want to see that. And this is just an elaboration on some things I either didn't discuss in depth, as well as maybe a few things shifted from that video. So go check that out first if you have it, and then come back and watch this for my full thoughts. Alright, so I'm blocking the Dark Knight, the Batman poster. I probably shouldn't be blocking that anyway. First thing I wanted to touch on is just... didn't really touch on the humor last video when discussing the film, and that was one of my favorite parts of the film. I really like the dry humor aspect of it, and I was anticipating, if you had asked me before going into the film, I would have said humor would have ruined it, just on the perception I had of it, what it was going to be, my idea of it, but I am glad that humor was incorporated and the way it was. Specifically, I mentioned last video that Jeffrey Wright as Gordon was my MVP, and he just kept bringing the jokes. Of course, Colin Farrell as Penguin as well. And then Robert Pattinson's Batman with some, definitely dry delivery. I really like the humor. And then one thing that, the humor I just forgot to touch on last time, but one thing that I did not forget and just did not touch on, and the truth is probably that I just didn't want to mention any negative aspect of the film, but there's one thing I really did not like about the film. Major spoilers, okay? Click off if you don't want to hear. Click off if you don't want to hear. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay. The scene towards the end, if you've seen the film, you know it, with Joker. Don't love it. It feels, I watched a video and it got a little more explanation with it. I'm a little more okay with it, but it feels just like a very studio forced scene, with Barry Keoghan as the Joker. I'm not too convinced with his performance or this version of the character yet. Obviously, I'm not fully casting it out. I'm sure it could be good at some point. But it just felt like a very cheesy addition to throw at the end that I did not really appreciate. Sort of soured the ending a bit for me. And that is the only actually negative thing I think I have to say about the film. I'm going to discuss a little bit of things that somewhat decreased my enjoyment, but they're not negative per se. They just, again, decreased my enjoyment. But this is the one negative thing. And so I did mention that this was after my second watch. I watched it a second time opening night Friday with a great crowd, by the way, on a big screen. And I will say that this time I definitely felt the length more than the first time. I felt expositional scenes more dialogue in certain scenes, and it just taking up so much time. There were 2 scenes in particular, and again, spoilers, where Bruce goes to talk to Carmine Falcone, gets this information from him, yada yada, and then he goes to Alfred to discuss it again. And those 2 scenes in particular just felt a lot slower to me at that point. I was just not as invested in them. And then also, I will say, I did mention in the last video that the third act problems people bring up, which is definitely true. I think I mentioned that last video, I don't know. But the complaint about it is the third act sort of, it climaxes at one point and then it just keeps going, and that's just a fact. Now, I still love the ending. I wouldn't cut any of it. I think it's great. I think most people feel that way. I think the ending is still an awesome part of the film, but it is sort of true that it does climax and then it just keeps plateauing, where a normal film would, that would be where you start to conclude, that would be where you start to finish your story, whereas the Batman does just keep going. It's good content, but that doesn't change the fact that it feels you're less invested in that part, because that's just how the human brain works, and that's how we perceive media. We expect it to, we're invested for most of the film, and if it strays from that typical structure, we just get less invested. Well, I don't want to speak for every human being on the face of the earth, but I will say that the second time around, I definitely noticed me being less invested in that third portion. And then I thought about it retrospectively, and I'm like, yes, I still love this stuff, guys. I promise you, I love that part. I would not cut a single thing, okay, except for maybe that one scene I mentioned. But that whole, 40-minute stretch is great, but I'm less invested as an audience member, just because that's the nature of things. You can't really force yourself to be more invested, because the film climaxes and it keeps going. that's just the reality. All right, folks. So I mentioned a long time ago, I'm not sure on what video, but it has sort of stuck with me, that I rarely give S tiers on the first watch. And if you saw the first part of the Batman video, you will know that I did do that. And I probably should not have done that. I probably should have let it sit. I definitely should have waited for the second watch, because now I have to make this second video. But the Batman is perfectly fine being at an A right now. It's going to be a high A, an incredible film that I absolutely loved. Everything, I want to make this clear. Everything I said in the first video remains true, except for the rating I gave it. That's the one thing that is different. The title remains true. The Batman is everything I wanted and more. Every point, that my favorite scene that I discuss in depth at the end, it's all still true. But also the things I said in this video are true. So the Batman is going to be a high A. That's where I'm leaving it. It comes out on HBO Max, I believe, April 4th, just a month after. It's pretty incredible. So I will probably check it out then. And if not, then, it could eventually be an S again in the future. It's definitely not going below an A, because it's still an incredible film that I had a great time with. But the Batman is going to be an A. Everything I said in the last video is true. Everything I said in this video is true. All right, folks, let me know if you've seen it twice, maybe. This is the part 2, of course. Let me know what you thought of it the second time. I've heard from anyone I've heard who's watched it a second time, they said their opinion only went up. So I guess I'm in the minority here. But folks, let me know what you thought. I've been EDPC Reviews. I will see you next time. Goodbye.